I get the pleasure of putting all this together. So, let's briefly give a hakdama on Shehecheyanu, and then we'll move in. So, last week I mentioned that Shehecheyanu is a beautiful bracha. It's a beautiful bracha because, on a basic level, it's Hakasa Tov Kodesh Baruch Hu. We're saying to Hashem, thank you for bringing me to this moment, be it a festive moment or be it a personal moment. And I also mentioned that there are about 5 different times when we say Shehecheyanu, which can be categorized into 2 spheres, which the Gemara itself does. The Gemara sometimes refers to Zman, which is festive, annual or cyclical types of Shehecheyanu, and then it uses Lashon Shehecheyanu, referring to those personal moments of joy on seeing a friend, joy on purchasing an item, or building a home. And knowing those 2 categories is crucial because on occasion there is either deliberate or accidental cross-fertilization. A classic case would be on second night Rosh Hashanah, whereby there's a suffix as to whether you say Shehecheyanu for halachic reasons. The eitzah we give is to have a new fruit, which itself is cyclical, right? So fruit and chag is the same sug, but a new piece of clothing is not cyclical. And of course, many poskim say that you wear a new piece of clothing and say Shehecheyanu. Right. So Rosh Hashanah Zaman Auerbach has a beautiful tshuva about this, but in which he's asking, how can we use one category of Shehecheyanu for another need of Shehecheyanu? We're using a Simchas Halev Shehecheyanu for a Zman Shehecheyanu. That brings about 2 questions. Number 1 is Hefsek, because if it's talking about something completely different, how can we say it? So he mentions that there.
Where's the Simchas Halev?
The Simchas Halev is in the clothing. If you're saying second night Rosh Hashanah, Shehecheyanu on clothing, it's not a Zman Shehecheyanu.
I know, but it's not the acquisition of an object. That's a category, right? You bought a new house. So that category is within the. You're right. I use Lashon Simchas Halev, which is Lashon Atur, as a descriptor of the Shehecheyanu sug. Perhaps you could say it's not necessarily Simchas Halev. Notwithstanding that, what I do know is you can buy a shirt any day. It's not cyclical. It's not like fruit. Meaning whether you view non-Zman related Shecheyanus as being Simcha Shecheyanus, certainly you would agree that they're not purely Zman Shecheyanus, right? On second night Rosh Hashanah, we have a need to say a Zman Shehecheyanu, and at least some people invoke a not Zman Shehecheyanu, and it raises, say, a halachic question which Rosh Hashanah discusses and others discuss, and our focus isn't that, but it highlights a tension between one sug for the other, which is important, because they have very, very different rules. And part of my analysis is that we often invoke one set of rules for the other at the cost of profound misunderstanding and seeming misuse. Not abuse, but seeming misuse. Now, let's think about a wedding. So a wedding isn't necessarily something which is cyclical, unless you're like one of those Hollywood people that get married every 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, right? A wedding is ideally for life. And the question is raised, should one say Shehecheyanu at a Nisuin? This question is not mentioned by the Rambam, it's not mentioned in the Gemara, it's not mentioned explicitly in Shulchan Aruch. Some people discuss whether one can draw a corollary with the conversations vis-a-vis Shehecheyanu on Milah and Pidyon Ben or not, for which there's a machlokes. For our purpose, we're not going to go there. I want to just purely focus on Nisuin because whether that conversation can enrich our conversation or not, we'll wait and see. So the first to really raise this question of whether Shehecheyanu should be said at a wedding is a Maharik, which happens to be a source for, which he says a question needs to be asked, how come we don't say it? Just as much as how come we don't say Shehecheyanu on Bittul Chometz? Meaning these are things we are encouraged to do, if not required to do. And surprisingly enough, we don't say Shehecheyanu. Now,
From there on, an attempt is made to try and justify our silence. Justify how come we don't say it. Now, some people take the argument.
What's his analogy of? What's his analogy of Bitul Chometz, which is a cyclical annual mitzvah?
You're right. Here, he's not talking necessarily about the distinction in categories. Truth be told, most people don't. Right. Here he's simply saying he's the first person who mentions Shehecheyanu or Nisuin in terms of its absence.
Is it here? You have a reference to Reb Shlomo Zalman?
I'll give you later.
Yeah.
In Minchas Shlomi, that's where he talks about it. In Halichot Shlomo, there's a discussion about it. There's a different Reb Shlomo Zalman that we'll be alluding to later on. Anyway, the Maharik is the first to raise the question of Shehecheyanu and Nisuin, in which he says, we don't, but I don't know why. And from then on, for the next few hundred years, there's a conversation, really from the 15th century till the 17th century, a rich conversation as to, is it that we shouldn't? Is it that we should but we don't? Or is it that we should? It's fair enough. Now the first to directly answer that question, or one of the first, is in the Halachas Kedamas, in source 1. And it's a strange source because even though it's highly cryptic, because it is one of the earliest remarks, it is quoted by anybody discussing the question. And what does he say? He quotes two earlier authorities, the Ribiton and the Urshraga. I mentioned their names, but I couldn't quite find their birth date and death date such that I've left it blank, but I'd like to find it. Certainly they predate Rabbi Yaakov Chavetz, right? So they are, the Urshraga I know is a Talmud of the Maharam. So he says, Nimtza b'kitve haribiton, sha'nasa isha yachol amar Shehecheyanu. So the Ribiton says, if you get married, say Shehecheyanu. It seems to be a fairly clear statement for which he doesn't need to bring some kind of justification. He goes without saying that if you're fishing for the question of can you say Shehecheyanu or Nisuin, so one opinion, the Ribiton says yes. Then we're told, Shalu et pi harav Urshraga.
Wait, one second.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, keep reading. That's what I'm looking at. Yeah.
Right. So then we're told, when they ask the Urshraga this question, the Talmud of Maharam, he says, Amar haya lo lish'ol im yemer daina emes.
This is a cynical.
So, just for the sake of the recording, he says, you should have asked me, do you say daina emes when you get married? Right. So when I first came across this, I thought, either this guy has a really bad relationship, right? Or he is, tremendously sarcastic, or he's making a halachic point. And in fact, because this source has been cited repeatedly in any meaningful study on Shehecheyanu and Nisuin, which, by the way, there aren't so many, but still it's been cited repeatedly, a number of authorities take different routes. Now, some people say he was just being sarcastic, right? I'm not here to say whether Urshraga was or wasn't. What I do know is other people take his remarks more seriously. So here we have the Gilionei Shas, number 2. The Gilionei Shas here, of Rav Yosef Engel, says, I either got to think he's having a laugh or he's making a point, and I think he's making a point. What does it say? Right? Presuming these aren't a joke, we've got to say, what does he mean? The Kevin the Zaka Eza Loi Zaka Kenegdai, right? Quotes Gemon Yavamos. Eza Kenegdai. He says it must be that Urshraga is making a remark about the quality of marriage. Some people are lucky to have good marriages, some people are unlucky to have bad marriages. Mia Marik Libis Chisi, who was suffering Matza or Moitze, the Chen Ein Levarchsman. The Gilionei Shas tries to find a defense for the Urshraga's remark, but in addition to do that, he's really actually trying to find a defense of the absence of saying Shehecheyanu on weddings. Meaning, immaterial to the Urshraga, it seems to be, based on the Maharik and others, we aren't saying Shehecheyanu to wedding. How so? Gilionei Shas says it's got something to do with the delight or otherwise of somebody getting married. And maybe somebody gets married and is miserable. So, since we don't know, we advise not to say the bracha.
We don't know, he's saying.
Right, I know there's a little bug of fly around.
Anyway, but we don't know. So
He says,
Sophic, yeah.
since it's a suffix. Now, by the way, it should be noted, and I mentioned this last week, there's a machlekes if suffix brachis lahaka is Shehecheyanu. Right? There's a machlekes halacha amongst the poskim. Here, he's basically saying, since we don't know, I'm a suffix and I'm going to be lahaka. I mean, he takes that view, which is interesting. Now, but what's fascinating is he's invoking a personal, if not theological, rationale for our non-recitation of what would apparently be a halachically justifiable, if not required, blessing. And this leads to a wide-ranging discussion in tshuvas about theology of marriage. So here we have a wonderful remark in the Ad Elazar. It's a longer tshuva, but this bit I find particularly heartwarming. Here he's discussing the Oshraga and the approaches of people like, he's not quoting Rav Yosef Engel, but the approaches of people such as this. He's trying to explain why somebody would say we don't need to say Shehecheyanu on a marriage. He says, if you take that rationale that you know if you're going to be happy, we would never bring korbanos, because you say thank you to Hashem for something, then the next day the something goes away. You're delighted about a miracle and you realize, in fact, that the artificial heart that was put into you is now risking your life. He says, you can't play the card that maybe it won't work out in the end, because if you think that way, you will never thank God for anything. And as such, he argues that such an argument has no justification, certainly can't support the non-recitation of Shehecheyanu. Now, moving on to the next page. I mentioned the Ma'arik, so we don't need to go over that again. I mentioned it only because these three sources, the Halachos Ketanos and the Gilyon Shas, Yad Elazar, are kind of a neat conversation themselves. Other people take a different view. So the Gilyon Marsha, this is Rav Shlomo Eger, he says, well, it would be improper to say Shehecheyanu at a wedding, because Nisuin is a hechsha mitzvah. The real mitzvah is pruvu, and since you're not fulfilling, there's no kiyum pruvu here and now, then you need not and should not be saying Shehecheyanu. Again, it's a defense for the silence of not saying Shehecheyanu. One can agree with it, one cannot agree with it, but here too we see an attempt to try and explain why aren't we saying this bracha, responding to the questioning of the Ma'arik. Now the Chasam Sofer is oft quoted on this point. It's somewhat remarkable, in fact, because again here too we have a halachic question. Why don't we say Shehecheyanu Nisuin? And he says something extraordinary. I'll say it outside and we'll look it through. He says, we say Shehecheyanu on things that are in God's hands. So we're saying to Hashem, thank you for doing that thing for me. Shidduchim is in our hands. And we'll say, well, there are lots of Gemaras that say Shidduchim in God's Baruch's hands, and we have famously the Gemara in Saita, Arba'im Yom, 40 days before a child is born. This one is in his dave to that one. He says, fine, but I don't know how that plays out. And of course, we have other Gemaras that says, Shein Kadmena Acher. So he argues that while in terms of kinyonim, purchasing of items, and other areas of Shehecheyanu, and of course Chagim, festivals, which are rooted on God's intervention in the world, Shidduchim, though stimulated by Kodesh Baruch Hu, are more heavily influenced by people, and as such, Shehecheyanu shouldn't be said. This is his argument, and it's quoted by lots of people.
God orchestrates that I buy this house.
Sorry?
God orchestrated that I buy this house.
Right.
The fact that I was toying with another house at the same time.
So he explains this. Let's go through his remarks. Anu b'Ba'alchem Kodesh Baruch Hu, she'gyam lezman hazeh, leknois kli chadash zeh, or le'anas b'pri chadash. So we say thank you to Kodesh Baruch Hu for buying this new item, for enjoying this new fruit. Kodesh gem kedushas zman atzmai. And certainly this is the case when it comes to celebrating a festival, regalim like the Shalosh Regalim or Chadayim. V'akol toile b'Kodesh Baruch Hu, and everything relies on a Kodesh Baruch Hu atzman. He yaitz miyifer. He is the one who divides it, and nobody else can undermine it. But something which depends on the choice and the desires of a person. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu can't change the will of another. He won't. Right, it doesn't say he can't, right? It says he doesn't. If a person basically says, I don't want zivug, Kodesh Baruch Hu isn't going to force it. That's why, of course, we have this philosophy of zivug sheni and things like that to explain how can it be that a person isn't happy even though Kodesh Baruch Hu apparently assigned you somebody that would make you. And ultimately we can't fully comprehend the notion that Kodesh Baruch Hu sets aside a zivug for you 40 days before the birth of a child. Ultimately, since Shidduchim isn't purely coordinated by Kodesh Baruch Hu, we shouldn't be saying the Shehecheyanu bracha for them. And no comparison can be drawn to receiving a gift from your friend. Because since there, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has decreed you're going to receive this. If the person in the end chooses not to give it to you, Hashem will make sure you get it from somebody else. Masha enken kiddushin, which is not the case with kiddushin. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in theory, could coordinate you, could meet somebody else. Ultimately, since it's partially in your hands, you shouldn't say Shehecheyanu.
I don't want to be irreverent, but the question remains more cogent than the answers.
Right.
It's a desperate attempt to justify.
Precisely. We have a very simple question. And as mentioned, I didn't bring the Makara, we mentioned just before, and there are halachic answers why perhaps you may not say Shehecheyanu. So wedding may be technical answers like the Aruch HaShulchan who says that maybe it's hard to find the timing. I too can challenge this, but here we're going into a whole different sphere altogether. The simple question, Marik, is how come we don't? And you either have the Arshraga who says, because you should say Daina Emes, which is hilarious in a strange way, since so much ink has been spilt in discussing his remark. The Gilyon Shas explaining that remark and the response of the Yad Elazar. You've got the Gilyon Marshal, which at least in terms of halachic reasoning, pruvu, has some legs to stand on. But still, one would strongly question it. I didn't mention, but there are others, for sure, who basically say that Shehecheyanu is a mizman azman. They reject these two categories of Shehecheyanu. This is due to an overemphasis on the shittiv of Shreiragon, who basically only sees Shehecheyanu as mizman azman bracha, and consequently they say, since a nisuin, since a wedding is not mizman azman, it shouldn't be said. Again, I would strongly question that, but certainly those remarks are found in the halachic conversation. But really, Tvu'at. I can't remember. I can give you the reference. There are a few other ha'oras of different poskim giving different reasons. Perhaps that's the one other that I didn't cite here, but it makes the conversation. But I don't cite it because I believe sincerely, strongly that to reject the notion of Shehecheyanu as not purely being mizman azman is to undermine a significant category of Gemara. And I'm nobody, but I'm speaking on behalf of other people who are somebodies. But really, the conversation that interests me begins with the remarks of the Marktzia of Yaakov Emden. Because while we mentioned before the Riboton said you should say Shehecheyanu, so we've heard one remark saying yes, although with no rationale whatsoever. But Yaakov Emden is the first who makes a thorough and comprehensive remark about Shehecheyanu on a wedding. And so we pay attention, and even those who strongly disagree with him find him to be really the anchor of the conversation. So Yaakov Emden is writing here on the tour, discussing in Reish Chaf Gimel about Hilchos Shehecheyanu, and he says, I think you should. More than that, he says, I think you should say Shehecheyanu. he says both the Chosen and Kala should say Shehecheyanu, which is pretty significant for a whole bunch of reasons. And he also says it shouldn't just be on Nisuin at the wedding, but also at the Shidduch. He says you should say actually 2 Shecheyanus. Or at the very least, Shehecheyanu is justified even at the Shidduch. It's not based on the ritual of wedding, it's based on the joy of union, which begins with a Tmayim, with a Shidduchim. So we'll quickly go through some of his remarks, and more than that, Rav Yaakov Emden tries to bring some kind of a smachta, a biblical support for his argument, although it should be noted, he does provide a disclaimer. His disclaimer is, if she's an undesirable woman, then don't say anything. So if you've got a suitable woman, certainly you should say Shehecheyanu upon marrying her. Either given the fact that you are fulfilling the mitzvah of marriage, certainly this would be the case if she's your first wife. Sorry?
First wife because of what you keep calling Simchas Alei.
It's more important. It could well be he's also making reference to Purim. I mean, he's saying, I think you say Shehecheyanu at a Nisuin, and this presumes A, you are happy with your wife, and this is most likely to be willingly expressed when you feel overcome with emotions such as a first wife. And he draws a distinction. He reminds us of halacha, which is that you say Shehecheyanu if you see a good friend after 30 days. And he says, surely getting married is at least as joyous as seeing a friend you haven't seen for 30 days. Meaning he's bringing, if you call it Kal V'chomer, he's making a Kal V'chomer here. If of course she's not suitable, and here we're not talking necessarily about somebody who has got serious questions of a family background or somebody who behaves in improper ways. He's simply saying that he doesn't like her nose, he doesn't like how she talks, but he's chosen to marry her. Particularly because he finds her family's finances to be attractive to him. Then for sure you don't say anything. And he quotes the Sefer Hasidim. The Sefer Hasidim discusses this case of a person who is unhappy with whom he is marrying. It says you should say Hatova Meitiv and Doina Emes, a bit like the Oshraga, and discusses how to balance that. The Sefer Hasidim, of course, is not a halachic work, but it's worthwhile noting that a statement like that is in the Shimpig place. Now, he's saying that Hatova Meitiv and Doina Emes mentioned in the Sefer Hasidim are both extraneous. We don't need to go there. Furthermore, he says that you should be able to say Shehecheyanu even when agreeing the Shidduch. He mentions that you don't say Hatova Meitiv at this point because there's no hanoah to both of them. Each individually are joyous. There's no shared joy yet. They're not yet a unit, which one could again debate, but still. And again, he reminds us that says that a shidduch is at least as good as hearing good news, for which you'd say Shehecheyanu. He says, and I bring a raya from the Torah. Well, not quite a raya smach. He says, look at Eliezer, the servant of Avraham. He says, he gave thanks and praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even upon chancing upon Rivka, even that point, there was no certainty of her going with him. He had to ask again to confirm that she was willing to come. Still, he says a bracha simply on this indication that things are going well. Even upon consequently, he's saying, so Shehecheyanu should be said. Of course, in making this remark, he is concurring with Yad Elazar and strongly challenging people like the Gilei Nashas, who says, you never know. He says, what are you talking about? In the Torah we have cases where people are praised who celebrate, even when you have no idea what's going to happen. The whole Hilchos Karbanos wouldn't exist. So he goes on to say, Alachat kama v'kama b'simchas mitzvah. Certainly this is the case that you should say Shehecheyanu b'simchas mitzvah of a wedding, as it says, Kim seis chasan al kala. Mikala lin poshet be'inai levach al shiduchin gamkin. He says, so I believe you should say Shehecheyanu to wedding, and you should say Shehecheyanu to shiduchin. And he adds, Gama Isha Tabarich, he's the first person who mentions the fact that the woman too should say the bracha. V'terehi alav bakach, mishum da'atzta b'chol dehu nichala, mishum hachi afilu hu zakin chiger ilei v'kai gavna v'kol malkum asaf patam v'brachas. He said, even though maybe she isn't the most thrilled, based on the premise that a woman is happy and married or not, she should say Shech. So the Mark Tzia, the Rav Yaakov Emden, provides a lengthy, and I've cut out just a few bits only because of space and time, but a lengthy and rigorous attempt to not just support the notion of saying Shehecheyanu to wedding, but offering what he argues are rayas. Rayas based on the din of seeing a chaver tov and the raya from the Torah, adding that she too should say it as well. And truth be told, logic would argue, or at least from one place where you could stand vis-a-vis marriage, logic would argue that women should say Shehecheyanu no less than a guy. Most women are happy to get married. And the reason the Gemara is that a woman is more happy to get married in terms of happiness than a guy. So if Shehecheyanu is dealing with Simcha, it's a no-brainer. So that's Mark Tzia. And in response to him, the Chidah takes a different view. And it's interesting. Based on my studies in Shehecheyanu, the Rav Yaakov Emden and the Chidah have a number of ping-pong disagreements about Shehecheyanu. And as I've said, Shehecheyanu is a fascinating framing device because it has halachic weight, and yet everybody can see that it has at least partial, if not total, subjective expression. How much, how little, depends on the halachic opinion. And so the Chidah basically says, I kind of agree and I kind of don't. Ala isha im haguna, he says, about a woman, if she is suitable, v'chaviv alay, and she's dear to him, meaning he likes her in one way or another, yivar Shehecheyanu. So he's quoting here the Mark Tzia. Well, Li Nireh says the Chidah Machzik Bracha, which is on the Birkei Yosef. Li Nireh Yivarach B'loi Shem HaMalchus. He says, I don't think you say with Shem HaMalchus. Meaning he's concurring with the principle of Shehecheyanu. He's just deeply unsure about the halachic suitability of saying a full bracha, since until then it seems not to have been the minhag. He says, even if we're dealing with a guy who was over 20 years and so he's going to be thrilled to have gotten married, of course, for him, over 20 years is already on the shelf, right? Notwithstanding that, I say you say b'liv Shem HaMalchus. So the Chidah doesn't challenge Rav Yaakov Emden's rationale for Shehecheyanu. He just, based on the history, based on the Ma'arik, based on the fact that the Gemara, the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention it. So he says, I think, I understand we want to say Shehecheyanu, but better to say b'liv Shem HaMalchus, and we see this in numerous occasions where people are masupuk about Shehecheyanu, where two options are given. Option A is say Shehecheyanu on something else and have Kavanah, which we'll see later on. Option B is say it, but say it b'liv Shem HaMalchus. I still see that as a positive endorsement of the notion, even though it's an acknowledgement of the complexity, or at least the seeming silence of the previous Rishonim. Rishonim on the issue. Now, so you've got Rav Yaakov Emden on one side, you've got the Chidah not on a completely different side, but in terms of whether you say the full bracha or not, he's taking a different position. What does the Kaf HaChaim say? Again, it happens to be not many other people address this. The Kaf HaChaim not only cites both opinions, but he refers to his drashos on Nisuin, called Chukei Chaim. And it's very interesting. So from this point on, numerous people take more seriously the halachic position of the Chidah in terms of not saying Shem HaMalchus, but they still cite, if not approvingly, the position of the Mark Tzia. he says, "Ha'ishan haguna hiva chavivalei katav mark tzad afilu k'shnibur hashluchim roi lebach Shehecheyanu ve'en tzarach loymar irusin." So he quotes the Rav Yaakov Emden that says, "Say Shehecheyanu at the wedding and at the shidduchim." And then he mentions a machzik brach the Chidah, who says, "Fine, say Shehecheyanu, but bli shem malchus." Now, what he doesn't mention explicitly, but it is implicit in his writings, because we're going to see in a second, is Rav Yaakov Emden said both chosen and kala. He goes on to say, "I'm b'sev a cotton or kodesh, or I think it's cotton here, Chukei Chaim." He says, "See my book of essays, Chukei Chaim, in Drush Beis Nisuin, shekatavnu, where I've written the Gama Avi Achatam, the Avi Akali yesh leim levarach mishum tekami posuk chule livnechem noshim b'chule." Both the father, the groom, and the father bride should say Shehecheyanu. So according to Kaf HaChaim, we've now snowballed a little bit. When you think about the level of simcha, the chosen, the kala, and the fathers of both the chosen and kala will be mekayim an independent mitzvah of marrying off your children, should say Shehecheyanu. He says, but
you mean 1 second? Why the fathers was la'asiya isha, not the mothers of
the asiya isha is a bryson kedushin.
For
fine.
Father.
Right, but the pasuk in Yirmiyah says both ways. Kulivnechem noshim, right? Livneisechem, I can't remember the next part of the pasuk. It's the flip side. I wrote it here: take wives to your sons and give your daughters to men. It's the key of a pasuk.
So not just aviyakala, the ima shalakala, ima shalachas should also know.
So he doesn't go as far as that, because it seems to be instructions on the father of both a son and a daughter. Marry off your children is a din of the father, but it applies not just to a ben like the Bryce and Kiddushin, but also to a bas. Now, the Kaf HaChaim concludes and says, so we have 4 people who are in the running for saying Shehecheyanu at a wedding, or the Shidduchim as well. Still, because he's cognizant of the Chidah, he makes a suggestion. He's the first, to my knowledge, who makes a suggestion explicitly vis-a-vis Nisuin. Now, you should say the bracha al bega chadash or pri chadash. Option A, say on a new piece of clothing or a fruit. Again, we find this blend of a cyclical or a simcha dika Shehecheyanu. And if that's not possible, say b'li shema malchus. Meaning, either say the full bracha, and he says that first. According to Kaf HaChaim, it's nice, I say nice in halachic terms, it's nice to say Shehecheyanu in full for these occasions, since the chashash noted by the Chidah, so find a way to say it in a way that's fully legitimate.
So if a kala is wearing, I didn't ask her, but tomorrow night, did she rent the gown?
We're going to get to that.
Is it from a gamah?
Oh.
But if it's her own gown, then that's
Yeah.
better than a ring. Maybe it's more expensive than a ring.
So we're going to see the Chaim David Alevi in a second. So the Kaf HaChaim basically says, I think 4 people should say Shehecheyanu, but I echo the rationale of the Martzia. I nod my head towards the Chidah. This is how I suggest it. Oh, so I don't know anybody who has a Aviyah Chosan, Aviyah Kala, the Chosan and the Kala, talking about Shehecheyanu, let alone doing it. Now, I'm a big fan of Chaim David Alevi for a whole bunch of reasons, and I quoted him last week about Shehecheyanu. He talks about Shehecheyanu wedding in 2 places. One in Makor Chaim HaShalem, where he quotes a Chasam Sofer to defend why we don't say it. Then he says an interesting rationale, which I didn't add in only because of, against space. He actually says something remarkable. Why don't we say Shehecheyanu on a wedding? He says, because I don't think the groom is unhappy with his wife. He's just very, very nervous. He's not at a place of feeling the Simchas Alev yet. And he says, that's why there's a mitzvah of Simchas Chasan al Kala. It's not that they're happy, you need to make them more happy. It's because they're nervous, you need to make them happy and to get over that anxiousness.
I'm aware of his, or there's
so
2 versions.
So, Makar Chaim HaShalem is a 5-volume, basically, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch interweaved with Hashkafa. There is a Kitzur of that, Kitzur Makar Chaim HaShalem, which kids use in schools here. In addition to that, he has 2 accompanying volumes. One is on Chatan Bakala, which as it so happens, he doesn't discuss specifically this question in full detail. But in his volume on Makor Chaim Libnot Yisrael, the quote that I'm about to read makes an important remark.
And that's where he elaborates what you just
No, so what I just said now is from Makor Chaim HaShalem Chelek Beis, pages 191 to 192. Again, I can send that to you. And he says, he quotes with Aruch HaShulchan, he rejects it. He quotes Chasam Sofer, he kind of rejects it. And he says, I think the general reason why people don't say Shehecheyanu is because the Chassan and Kala are nervous. He's not saying they've made a mistake. He's saying that's why they need some cheering up. That's part of the mitzvah, Mesamech Chassan and Kala. It's kind of just a new way of thinking about something we take for granted. But then he says something of great interest in his volume, Makor Chaim Libnot Yisrael. He explains how he understands the halacha, quoting Marktzia, quoting the Chidah, offering a solution which is like the Kaf HaChaim, but I think highly practical. Here he says, if you marry a woman who is suitable, etc., using the same lashon, roy levach Shehecheyanu. He says, I agree, you should be saying Shehecheyanu. Rav Chaim David HaLevi is amongst many people who is a pro Shehecheyanu posek. Gama isha tavak Shehecheyanu. He says, I agree with Marktzia, I agree with the Kaf HaChaim. Aval Maran HaChidah pasak levach l'lo yaskarat Shem HaMalchus. He says, but the Chidah says so, and as a Sephardi posek who takes the Chidah seriously, he feels he can't challenge that, or he doesn't wish to challenge that. So he makes an eitzah, and it's an eitzah like the Kaf HaChaim. But Nachon, the right thing to do is, on the day of the wedding, when the chassan and kala are putting on their new clothes, they should say Shehecheyanu b'shem HaMalchus. It's obvious because here we've got they're putting on new clothes. So even if there's a machlokes about saying Shehecheyanu on the nisuin, we found a route to say Shehecheyanu in a proper way, and he's saying this is a beautiful way to link the proper way with the celebration of the wedding. So, and when could you say that? He says you could say it beforehand. Truth be told, I'm not saying this is what he says, but it would be justifiable to even say it under the chuppah, because the din of Birchas Shehecheyanu wearing clothes is Kol Zman you feel simple. You put it on a couple of hours beforehand, everybody would agree that in theory, if you so wished, that Shehecheyanu could be said under the chuppah. It's not done, but definitely what he's saying here is a fine and I would say wise balance between the desire to maintain an expression of Shehecheyanu at the wedding and to make sure that nobody's challenging and showing respect for the Chidah. However, while that is what Rav Chaim David HaLevi suggests, we find a slightly different minhag in certain communities, not all, only some, whereby the chassan puts on a talis. Why a talis? There are two reasons. One is based on the pasuk here in Dvarim Chaf Beis, Gedilim taseh lecha arba kanfos, and he goes on to say ki kach ish isha. So there is an association between talis and chuppah. That's one of the reasons why Ashkenazim put on talis after chuppah, right? Of course, there's another notion hinted to by the Ramah, although he doesn't specify chuppah, that chuppah is something which is spread above the chassan and kala. So there's a concept of having a talis at a wedding, and consequently it is customary in certain communities that the kala buys a chassan a new talis, and he wears it. He wears it als the chuppah, and perhaps as a fulfillment of that pasuk. And as it says in an Isum Kil Chatam, a contemporary guidebook, a rabbinic guidebook of getting married, in certain communities people say, put on the talis, if it's still daytime they say Yitatef B'tzitzit, if it's new they'll say Shehecheyanu, and then saying Shehecheyanu on the talis, then they'll have korbanot for Nitzur. I did that, other people do that, fine. What's interesting is the following. Though it's a way to make sure Shehecheyanu is said at the chuppah, unlike almost all the other positive remarks about Shehecheyanu, he only focused on the chassan. Now, let's be clear. All the sources we've seen that said, say Shehecheyanu at a wedding, either the Riboton, who gives no rationale, or the Marktzia, or the Chidah, or the Kaf HaChaim, or Chaim HaLevi. I accept that some of these are Sfaradim, but truth be told, most others aren't talking about it or trying to find a reason why we don't. But in all of those cases, they approvingly encourage the Kala, and the Kaf HaChaim speaks about the father of the Chosn and Kala. So we see an alternative minhag, whereby the Chosn is putting on the talis. Okay, now that doesn't do anything wrong or do anything right. It's a way of saying Shehecheyanu the Nisuin. She could say Amen, right? And in theory, that's not a problem. But now the penny drops. Because we see a shift in how to comprehend Shehecheyanu Techum. Because at least according to some authorities, and here I'm bringing just one example of a few others I've collected. Here I'm quoting the Yalkut Yosef, Yitzchak Yosef, the chief rabbi's son of Rav Ovadia, based on the teaching of Rav Ovadia. He mentions this minhag as being something that minhag Sfarad do and many Ashkenazim do as well. But then he says something extraordinary, which not only challenges, I would say, our understanding of Shehecheyanu, but certainly is a shift in our perception of what the Shehecheyanu is being said on. He says, so if you're Masada Kedushin, you say to your Masada Kedushin recently, you say to the Chosan, when you put on the talis, think about the Nisuin. So far, so good. Meaning, if that's your minhag, I get it. Fantastic. Now he's saying, when saying the Shehecheyanu on the talis, you should say you're also fulfilling the mitzvah of saying Shehecheyanu on your new hat, your new suit, you're wearing for your wedding. So that makes you think, I accept that that's in theory acceptable, but it's strange that Rav Yitzchak Yosef would encourage a chosin to do so. You could have said Shehecheyanu earlier on as well. Okay, we're bundling the Shehecheyanu, that's what he's saying. Then he goes on to say, and you can also say Shehecheyanu on that talis, which will fulfill your hat and your clothes out in your new apartment, and the new furniture, and all the new presents you've got. Boy, oh boy, this chosin's got a lot of kavanah on this Shehecheyanu. Now just pause for a second. From what we learned last week, Shehecheyanu is a distinct bracha for Bais Chadosh, Kelim Chadoshim. They all deserve Shehecheyanu. You can bundle them together. But to have, say Shehecheyanu on the talis, which is really a nice minhag, and in so doing, have kavanah for Shehecheyanu on all these things which are mufurish in a Mishnah, in the Gemara, and Shulchan Aruch, is somewhat perplexing, right? Surely we should say to the guy, you should say Shehecheyanu on these things. Moreover, he's received some of these things maybe weeks ago. To think he's going to wait till when he puts on this talis and has this burst of spiritual, joyful energy is deeply questionable. But then the most deeply questionable is what is added in the parentheses at the end. He's now said something unbelievable. It used to be the Chosn and Kala would say Shehecheyanu. They'd say Shema Malchus, Li Shema Malchus, whether they're fathers or not, whatever you say. But we basically said she is happy, she can, if not should, say the bracha. She is an object for joy. Now, Rav Yitzchak Yosef and others, but he is perhaps the most explicit in making this remark, says she's not somebody, an agent of the joy. She is an object. She's a kli. If anybody talks about the objectification of women, this is a beautiful example of it. Rav Yitzchak Yosef says, when the chosin puts on that talis, he needs to think about all the things he's just acquired, including his kala. Now, of course, we have a posuk in Rus, a mission kiddushin, which talks about kinyan for an ish. But even so, most of the Rishonim and Achronim say there are limits on how we view that kinyan. And notwithstanding that, when talking about Shehecheyanu on Nisuin, many of those people would say that she has independent joy based on the principle that women are happy when they get married. And I say, I have an issue with that remark. And you don't need to be a feminist to have an issue with that. You have to say, it just makes no sense as to the fundamental shift. And in training people to think that way, if the Marktzia, the Chidor, the Kaf HaChaim says she is happy and she can express her happiness, and Rav Yitzchak Yosef says she doesn't have emotions, she's a thing. I wonder deeply about how we are misreading Shehecheyanu. It's a very big simon of profound misunderstandings. Let's park that to a side.
No, it's worse than that.
Of course, I'm speaking for the recording.
What's sad is, you're recording?
No, but yeah.
Oh, but he's the Rabbi Rashi.
I'm well aware.
This is his understanding
I'm well aware.
the role of women in modern society.
Right. And let's be clear, that additional remark is not hechrechi. It doesn't mean, now, it's in parentheses, doesn't mean that somebody else had it. It's in all the additions the Yalkut Yosef. I'm presuming he said that. If not, he said it. It's in the book which has his name on it, and that itself is a statement. And when I saw this, my mouth dropped, and I said, "Oh my Lord!" Aside from just a basic understanding of Shehecheyanu, we've made a kala into a thing. And if we didn't have a Masorah that she not just isn't a thing, but she is an object to be able to say, "I am happy," maybe I could even justify it based on the Mishnah and Pasuk and Rus, but this has no leg to stand on whatsoever. Lehefech, when we think about the dinim of Shehecheyanu, we were mentioned before we started learning, that she's a recipient of at least one matana which has significant halachic weight, meaning a taba'as, for which one could make a strong argument, and I would make an extraordinarily strong argument, that at some time or another, under the chuppah or elsewhere, she should say Shehecheyanu. And if you want to find somebody who says that explicitly, Rav Moshe not only says that she should say Shehecheyanu, he says a chassan when he buys it should say Shehecheyanu, and then when she receives it, she should say Shehecheyanu as well. So I have, I look at a chuppah, I recognize there's a halakhic debate about whether you say Shehecheyanu to wedding or not, or that I reject, or at least strongly challenge, some of the theological or halakhic defenses why we don't. Very few people say we mustn't, and those who say we must support b'shir Shem Malchus, actually they're saying very profound and subtle things. The Chidah and the Kaf HaChaim. They're saying very positive things about Shehecheyanu, notwithstanding the limitation of the recitation of Brach. Now, moving on to the final piece, which is long but very worthwhile looking through. So where are we at? We're at a place where option A, you say you don't say it. Option B, you say you do say it fully.
Rav Moshe is saying, that's how you're interpreting when you buy it. When the person buys it,
yeah,
you should say,
you should know that the context, I didn't bring again because of space. The context is, if a chassan buys a ring in the 9 days for getting married, can he say Shehecheyanu? So I mean, it's first there. A number of people are chaylek on Rav Moshe. They're chaylek because they don't.
Because of avails of the 9 days.
No, so you can disagree on that. He's discussing that question.
Yeah.
The key take home for me for this tshuva is Shehecheyanu on a tabat, both in terms of him and in terms of her. Some people question in terms of him. There are those who make those remarks. Bezois HaBrocha discusses that. There are some people who say our minhag is not say Shehecheyanu and Tachshitim, which we're going to see in a second, which is a recorded minhag for at least a couple of 100 years. It's interesting. And Rav Shlomo Auerbach takes that line. But even if you say that's an aminig, at least in the theory of halacha, we would agree that at least she should be saying it, if not him. Now, this leads me to ask, so nowadays, what should we do? So for those who don't have the minhag...
So Rav Moshe, though, is very clear. He's saying, I talk about making instead of Shehecheyanu, but that she should make a bracha.
Yeah. He's not saying under the chuppah at all, but he's saying as a halachic requirement, it's a no-brainer, pretty much being. So where are we up to? Option A is you don't say Shehecheyanu. Fine. It's not your minhag or as a machlokes, fine. Option B is you do say Shehecheyanu, let's say under the chuppah, and if you don't read Yalkut Yosef, the chassan is saying it, having kavanah for the nisuin. Fine. Option C is you're saying it either on the new clothes or on new fruit, or I like the solution of Chaim David Levi on the new bride and groom's clothes when they're getting dressed before the wedding. But I have option D, which is a Rav Moshe and others, which is you got a ring. I know that he's saying Shehecheyanu on his talis. I'm saying to my question is, if she used to say Shehecheyanu, how come we're not encouraging her to say it again? So one of the reasons it says no obvious chayfetz for her to say Shehecheyanu. I say the tabas. Look at Rav Moshe. So there are very, very few people discuss this, and I came across this tshuva of the Avnei Derech. He's a contemporary religious Zionist posek of sorts. I don't know him, but I've read a couple of his tshuvas, and he has this very lengthy essay discussing the propriety or otherwise of saying Shehecheyanu on the ring by the color. He's not in. And what he begins by saying is, I don't know. So I asked Rav Yaakov Ariel. Rav Yaakov Ariel says we shouldn't because of tznius. And it's not a minute. It's a difficult thing. I've got to say, some people do say Shehecheyanu isn't something we do b'far hesed. It's an individual and independent bracha. So maybe that is feeding Rav Yaakov Ariel's remarks. I would argue that in contemporary chuppahs where brides want to speak, if she wants to say something, this is a good thing to say. This is a halachically rooted, justifiable, mefurish based on mishnayos and things like that to say when you've got a new kli. There's a machlokes about tachshitim. Okay, but if she wants to, and she's happy with it, I can't find any person to say she shouldn't say that bracha. Then he goes on to say, I asked this question of Rabbi Yosef Lieberman, the Mechaber Sefer Mishnas Yosef, and he spends the rest part quoting his reply. Now, Rabbi Yosef Lieberman quotes Yaakov Emden, etc., etc., etc. But then he goes on to say, I don't think we should. I don't think it's a minhag to say Shehecheyanu, neither she, nor he, nor the grooms, nor the parents. And then you've got to say, well, why? He then draws a comparison in the contrary way to Rav Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden says, say Shehecheyanu because you'd say it on a friend. He notes that nowadays many of us don't say Shehecheyanu when you see a friend for fear of offending people. So if you unpack that even further, since we're living in a world of deception, if you say Shehecheyanu on one friend, you have to say it on everybody, that's why you say it on nobody. If you say Shehecheyanu on this wedding, you have to say it on all weddings, so you should say Shehecheyanu on no weddings. Then he goes on to say that while there's a tradition in some communities not to say Shehecheyanu on some tachshitim, he says, actually, I think we shouldn't say Shehecheyanu on any tachshitim. Then he says you shouldn't say Shehecheyanu on any tachshitim and any matanos, because you may not like it, it may be too expensive, it may be too fragile, etc., etc. And he says ultimately the Chosan says it on the talis, so I don't know what the problem is. He then invokes the theological argument by the Gileon Hashas that sometimes things don't work out anyway, so you shouldn't be saying it. He concludes by saying that I personally advise a Chosan and Kala to tell her parents not to buy them precious items for the wedding because things may not go well, he may break them. So he ends off basically saying no. But in doing so, what he takes is a siman or two or three of Shulchan Aruch and throws it out the window. He's basically said the din of Shehecheyanu in terms of kelim chashuvim, let alone the debate about nisuhin, let alone the discussion about seeing a chaver tov. He says, given our reluctance to say Shehecheyanu in some areas, we should say it in no areas, and I can't defend saying it for her, for him, anytime, anywhere. And as somebody who's learned as much as I can here for Shehecheyanu, I've got to say I don't even know where to begin with this. It invokes theological and mystical rationale to defend the not saying brachos which are brought in our traditional halachic works. It encourages people not to do what allegedly, let alone whether it's a reshus or chayva, but at the very least it's a reshus they can do. And here you have a wonderful moment where people are getting abundance of gifts, abundance of blessings. Whether we say Shehecheyanu should sell Nisun itself, at the very least on the tabas, or at the very least on the clothes, he rejects it all. So I have some issues with Rav Yaakov Ariel's remarks about tznius, because nowadays I'm not entirely convinced. Again, nobody's saying you must get the kalatzeh, but if she wants to, can she? My argument would say any woman who wants to say Shehecheyanu ma toiv, there is no reason not to, and quite a few reasons too, but to counterbalance the desire to say things which aren't halachically justifiable, meaning give somebody something to say which has roots in our Masorah, and the attempt by Rav Yosef Lieberman, I'm sure he's a tremendous Talmid Chacham, but I find it incomprehensible and unfathomable and certainly unjustifiable to justify why we don't say certain things is to say we shouldn't say it in almost all cases. The Sikkim, I know we've just gone briefly over time. What we have here is a fascinating prism to discuss Shehecheyanu. We have a question: should we say Shehecheyanu at weddings? There is a legitimate halachic debate, yes or no. We're never going to solve that. Some people say yes, some people say no. What I do know is, of all the people who say yes, they acknowledge that the bride is as worthy to be happy on her wedding day as a groom. And they either suggest with Shema Malchus, not Shema Malchus, with the talis, with the clothes or not. What we've seen in modern times with the Yalkut Yosef and with the Avnei Derech is something completely different, whereby she becomes an object on which to say Shehecheyanu, whereby attempts are made to delegitimate Shehecheyanu in many areas, let alone an area. Whether we should or shouldn't revert back to the suggestions of Marav Tzia or the Kaf HaChaim or of Chaim David Levi. You've heard that I'm very, very sympathetic to his view because I think it's halachically sound and logical and appropriate. What I do see here is many poskim misrepresenting, misunderstanding and misguiding people about a fairly sound and important bracha. And what does Shehecheyanu say? Hashem, thank you. A wedding should be a time where we are so God-centric. We say the Sheva brachas.
This highlights the problem that we have as a Chiloni community. We don't have anybody of stature who has the courage to come out and ask. You know what I mean? Like, if Aaron Lichtenstein were here, and if he said, say Shehecheyanu, the Kala should say it under the wedding. So people would quote him and a whole segment of the community. Okay, Rav Aaron said so, that's all. We don't have anybody. It's terrible.
We don't have anybody, I would say, but But I think about Rav Chaim David Levi. I know how he's been quoted and used in various different ways. But he has a substantive and rooted suggestion, an eitzah. He's not saying anything clever. He's saying nothing more than a Kaf HaChaim, and he's suggesting something that is inclusive and suitable. Whether you regard it as Dati Leumi or not, in many ways irrelevant. He was, but it's not quoted. Nobody knows about this material.
All these eitzos about the ring and the begadim, and if they go that far with furniture that she's going to, it escapes, it avoids, it circumvents the core issue of, like you just said, Shehecheyanu should be an expression, thank you God for the privilege of this life circumstance that you just handed me.
Right.
Much far greater than a new apricot,
or even a new talis. A talis is ultimately a piece of cloth with some strings, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So to think, as I say, that you place all your joy based on a piece of cloth, that's going to be the object of your celebration. This is, my Baruch Hashem, we just celebrated my 16th wedding anniversary with my wife. My talis is nice. My wife is nicer, and so to presume that I was more joyous on a piece of cloth than any other object or artifact or moment or so precisely. So because there's a machlekes and because it's ambiguous, I accept that we hook it onto something else. I'm generally against hooking onto things, but in this case, because few people spoke about it, you've only got Rav Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden is an important place, but still, he was still challenged by numerous people in a variety of ways. But at the very least, hook it onto something legitimate, be loud and proud, and make people say out loud, Todah Rabah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And whether the Chosn and Kala say it on their clothes, in public or in private, or whether he says it on his talis and she says it on her ring, that's in many ways just a technical question. And if a community chooses not to say Shehecheyanu, that too, the minhag, it's totally fine. What I find to be incomprehensible and indefensible is the marginalization, relegation, and dilution of halacha of Birchas Shehecheyanu on a day-to-day level, as we see in the Avnei Derech. The invocation of tznius for a person not to say a bracha, which is a din that they should say the bracha. I still find that difficult, although I accept.
Well, who is this?
Rabbi Yaakov Ariel he's a posek. I mean, he's not.
He's still living?
Yeah. I accept that this is essentially what I would say, at least from my final remark, and I've alluded to it. We live in an age, and I've got numerous essays about it, where people are trying to push boundaries at chasnas. And for some rabbanim, it's very difficult. We mentioned before the essays by Rabbi Stavs about the additions that people like to make for B'Shev Brachos. Part of it, not all of it, but part of it's because a Kala would like to say something. So she doesn't have a speaking role. And she speaks at work, she speaks in university, and she comes, the biggest moment in her life, it's as if she's got a tape over her mouth.
I was at a wedding where the Kala said, before he gave her the ring, Hareini Muchana Lekabel Kiddushin Mincha.
Oh, okay. It's a Shem Yichud.
But I'm saying that makes you happy, you woman, that makes you happy. You're just reinforcing your passive.
Okay, but it's we all need to be passive. We all need to surrender. The Rav famous, his remarks about surrendering, right? So choosing to be in a relationship is still a choice. However, we find the balance. But my belief is that Shehecheyanu should be said, should be celebrated, should be more prevalent in the Orthodox community. And in terms of a wedding, for those who want, this is a wonderful thing that should be encouraged because it has a foundation, it makes sense, and more than that, all I'm encouraging is I want to bring us back to the Merakzia and the Chidah and the Kavachaim and Rav Chaim David Alevi, and I want to strongly challenge Rav Yitzchak Yosef's reading of Shehecheyanu. And if a woman speaks, it's challenging, by the way. There's a social remark being made there, and to challenge the Rabbi Lieberman quoting the Avnei Derech, and even also in many ways Rabbi Yaakov Ariel. And I'm not trying to be a revolutionary, I'm just trying to be a guy who learns halacha and says, we have this beautiful thing, why aren't we saying it? So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for